Aaron Burr, the nation's third vice president, might have thought the chaos of the election of 1800 was finally behind him. Thomas Jefferson now held the presidency, with Burr serving beneath him, just as the Democratic Republicans had intended. From Burr's perspective, everything had gone according to plan. Now all he had to do was wait his turn. After all, both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had served as vice president before ascending to the nation's top office. But rather than dreaming away, he ought to have remembered two pieces of advice. Adams had called the vice presidency the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. And Jefferson had warned that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Little could Burr know that Jefferson's grudge would shadow his every move, first denying him influence while he sat just one heartbeat from the presidency, and later setting the machinery of the state against him, with the explicit aim of hanging him dead by the neck. Burr's own ambitions had left him exposed. His 1800 play for the presidency had ignored Jefferson's motto, "Do not bite at the bait of pleasure till you know there is no hook beneath it." Now he was trapped, presiding over the Senate with little power and facing constant public humiliation from the President of the United States. Yet even a disgraced vice president had one chance to reclaim honor: through dueling, a legally and socially recognized way for gentlemen to defend their reputation in early America. And if anyone embodied the perfect target for such an action, it was Alexander Hamilton. For Aaron Burr, this was the moment, and he would not throw away his shot. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon America's fallen founder, Aaron Burr. Episode number 3, The Duel Heard Round the World. Jefferson called his electoral victory a political revolution. The changes he brought to the Capitol were visible from the start. His inauguration was informal. He walked in everyday clothes rather than riding in a carriage. But one thing hadn't changed: Jefferson's attitude towards Aaron Burr. As we saw in the prior episode, Burr had been chosen reluctantly as Jefferson's running mate, a pragmatic move to secure New York. Once the election landed in the House of Representatives, Burr made a weak play for the presidency. 1 year into the administration, he had yet to find a way back into Jefferson's favor. His 3 sentences delivered at the inauguration may have been the longest conversation the two running mates ever shared while in power. Attacks on Burr's character emerged from both sides of the aisle, most focused on his reputation with women. Considering his wife had passed away 7 years earlier, the stories were politically motivated more than factual. Letters to his daughter about the women he dated only confirmed that the gossip was exaggerated for effect. Burr sometimes fought back. He threatened legal action to suppress a libelous book, but dropped the suit, preferring to expose the charges as ridiculous. Tensions escalated after he delivered a toast at a Federalist gathering celebrating George Washington's birthday. Normally a harmless gesture, it became political dynamite. Jefferson had clashed with Federalists over whether Americans should celebrate Washington's birthday or the 4th of July. Burr's toast to the Union of all honest men was taken as a subtle jab at those now controlling the government. In an era where honor was everything, slights like this were not merely social, they were invitations. And in the early Republic, one of the few legitimate ways to defend reputation was through dueling. Burr's growing isolation and the public attacks against him would make that recourse increasingly appealing. Two years into the job, Burr's loyal friend John Stallworth challenged New York's DeWitt Clinton to a duel. The charge? Clinton was actively trying to destroy Burr's reputation to advance his own career. Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton lays out the rules for us, the 10 duel commandments. Number 1, the challenge demands satisfaction. If they apologize, no need for further action. Clinton responded by calling Stallworth a liar, a scoundrel, and a villain. Commandment 2. Go and grab a friend. That's your second, your lieutenant when there's reckoning to be reckoned. Stallworth and Clinton each picked their seconds. Number 3. Have your seconds meet face to face. Negotiate a peace or negotiate a time and place. Most disputes die and no one shoots. This duel, however, strayed from that norm. The seconds failed to agree, setting up a confrontation in New Jersey. 5 shots were fired by each man. The first 3 missed, while the 4th and 5th wounded Stallworth in the leg. After each round, it was his choice to continue. The now bloody challenger stubbornly pressed on to a 6th round, which Clinton firmly refused, walking away and declaring his wounded opponent the winner. In the meantime, attacks against Burr continued in the press. The Burrite faction responded by starting the Morning Chronicle. If bullets couldn't defend him, perhaps words could. They hired Washington Irving, the era's most famous American writer, to shine a light on Burr's accomplishments. His works, Rip Van Winkle and Sleepy Hollow, put to bed the insulting notion that Americans were incapable of producing a literary masterpiece. Even a man of Irving's immense talent, however, struggled against the relentless negative press swirling around the vice president. Jefferson flat out refused to work with Burr on a graceful exit. At the nominating convention for Jefferson's second term, not a single Republican voted for Burr to continue as vice president. Instead, they chose New York Governor George Clinton. This might have allowed Burr to return to his home state, something he favored. But Jefferson tried to orchestrate a backroom deal. Clinton would run for both offices and resign his governorship if elected, bypassing popular sovereignty. Clinton refused, adhering to the ideals Jefferson himself had enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. The New Yorker left the task of opposing the sitting vice president to other members of his faction. This election for state office intensified Burr's feud with Alexander Hamilton. The former Secretary of the Treasury mostly recycled old attacks, but added a new accusation: that Burr, if elected, would dismantle the Union by joining New York to New England to create a more perfect Union. Although Burr had nothing to do with it, the alleged plot in the North turned out to be real. Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase more than doubled the size of the Union, and with a larger pie, each individual piece, even one as large as New York, becomes less important. While Jefferson's victory in 1800 was proving to be a revolution towards conservative policy, it had merely confirmed the majority of the founders' fear that Virginia was poised to dominate the new nation for the foreseeable future. The rumor, however, foreshadowed Burr's later charges of treason. Historian Nancy Eisenberg notes that public attacks became increasingly personal and pornographic. Burrites were labeled strolling players, a euphemism for male prostitutes. His home was likened to a bordello, adorned with mirrors on the bedroom walls. There, his opponents charged, The voyeuristic Burr and his minions indulged in the decadent pleasures of fornication and adultery. He was compared to Sardophilus and Heliogabalus, notorious classical libertines, the first of which dressed and behaved as a woman, while the latter had an appetite for young boys. Owing to the times, the vice president was accused of literally prostituting himself to black voters in exchange for political support. Burr's political career lay in ruins. The onslaught on his character produced the largest defeat in New York history. In 3.5 years, he had gone from nearly capturing the presidency to being effectively unemployed. As historian Nancy Eisenberg notes, Federalist editor William Coleman credited the opposition's newspapers, which circulated attacks on Burr's personal character, with an industry and at an expense hitherto unexampled. The Clintons persuaded voters that supporting Burr was futile. True enough, since even as governor, his authority would have been neutered by a council of appointment that was stacked against him. Duels were a common way to settle questions of personal honor. The tradition stretched back to the Middle Ages, when Europeans believed God would favor the just man. Although institutions like the Catholic Church sought to ban them, the structured nature of duels likely saved lives by preventing impulsive acts of violence. The chivalric tale of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, written in the late 14th century, captures this sense of honor. In the story, the Green Knight challenges his opponent to a duel, whereupon each man gets one free shot. Generously, he offers to let Gawain go first. The Knight of the Round Table strikes the Green Knight's head, only to watch the decapitated man rise, pick up his head, and announce he will return the blow in a year. Instead of fleeing, Gawain honors the agreement and faces his fate on the appointed day. This medieval concept of regulated combat evolved into a formalized system by 1777, when a group of Irishmen codified 26 rules for dueling in what became known as the Code Duello. The Hamilton-Burr duel followed this code, though neither man lived long enough to see the Americanized version written in South Carolina in 1838. By the early 19th century, dueling had become both a weapon of prestige and a tool for resolving disputes, a practice that spanned the United States. Even Abraham Lincoln once publicly apologized to a political rival to avoid a duel. PBS's American Experience notes that by Hamilton and Burr's time, dueling had begun to decline in the North. In the South, however, where Walter Scott's chivalric novels held sway, duels remained a socially accepted, if deadly, way to defend honor. A single insult, real or manufactured, could lead to a confrontation within days. For every man who gloried in the duel, PBS notes, there were many others who feared it. A word or two passed on a Friday night could mean a challenge on Saturday and death on Sunday. The bitter 1804 New York governor's race offered Burr no shortage of targets. Yet he chose Alexander Hamilton. The slight that ignited the duel was minor. A private comment calling Burr a, quote, dangerous man. It wasn't the wild claims about sexual depravity or treason that had circulated in the press. Burr discovered Hamilton's remark tucked into an Albany newspaper article quoting a Federalist who added, "I could detail you a still more despicable opinion which General Hamilton has expressed of Mr. Burr." The two Revolutionary veterans had crossed paths before. In prior disputes, Burr complained and Hamilton softened his criticism. This time, however, Hamilton delayed his response for 2 days. When he finally replied, he relied on lawyerly precision, stating, "How am I to judge of the degree intended, or how shall I annex any precise idea to language so indefinite?" Eisenberg notes that Hamilton decided to argue that the offensive statement was too vague to contain any certain meaning, and thus he was not bound by the inferences others might draw from his statements. He concluded, "I trust on more reflection you will see the matter in the same light as me. If not, I can only regret the circumstance and must abide the consequence." The initial challenge had been issued. Burr appointed William Van Ness, a New York City federal judge, as his second. Hamilton, offered an opportunity to walk away by clarifying his remarks, chose instead to appoint Nathaniel Pendleton. Pendleton's involvement slowed the proceedings, giving Hamilton time to assert that his statements did not impugn Burr's honor. It should have been enough, but Burr had fallen too far too fast. Rationally, Burr ought to have recognized that Jefferson and his Virginia allies bore far more responsibility for his political downfall. He might have even acknowledged his own role in the House debate over the 1800 election. But in this moment, he fixated on Hamilton, his bitterest rival, the man whose words and reputation had become the latest obstacle to reclaiming the honor he felt had been stolen from him. Hamilton was confronting his own political mortality. Once a firebrand whose rise was fueled by the fact that Washington was on his side, he had burned bridges by publishing the 95-page Reynolds pamphlet, confessing to an affair to defend himself against charges of corruption. His gambit as kingmaker in 1800, meant to restore his influence, had backfired, empowering the very Virginian coalition he had tried to suppress. No longer in Congress, Hamilton was sidelined, witnessing his own political impetus as the Federalists turned to younger voices. When Burr demanded a complete disavowal, an outright declaration of zero ill will, Hamilton balked. That was a bridge too far. Miranda's musical portrays this self-destruction vividly. In the song Burn, Hamilton's wife warns, "Be careful with that one. He will do what it takes to survive," and laments, "In clearing your name, you have ruined our lives." She recalls how her sister called him an Icarus, flying too close to the sun. You and your words, obsessed with your legacy, your sentences border on senselessness, and you are paranoid in every paragraph. Hamilton's letters, carefully worded, endlessly parsed, were more than political posturing. In the culture of honor that dominated the early republic, a man's public reputation was inseparable from his personal honor. Misstatements, perceived slights, or evasions could quickly escalate into a duel, as private grievances became public matters demanding redress. Burr, steeped in that same system, read Hamilton's revised letter as a new attack, not a clarification. Eisenberg notes that he found it a worse libel than the original, leaving injurious impressions in full force. When Burr refused to relent, the date for the duel was set. The fourth duel commandment states, if they don't reach a peace, that's all right. Time to get some pistols and a doctor on site. Burr and Hamilton agreed on a location just across the river in New Jersey, famously derided in the musical with the line, "Everything's legal in Jersey." Technically, dueling was illegal in both New York and New Jersey. Once a method that may have saved lives in medieval Europe by regulating the impulse for vengeance, firearms had made the practice far deadlier. Historian Robert Baldrick notes, it was only at the beginning of the 19th century that dueling assumed serious proportions in America, becoming a positive scourge in certain states of the Union. In the first decade of the 1800s alone, 110 duels were officially recorded, more than quadruple the pre-revolutionary rate. Politics accounted for roughly 28% of these encounters. While dueling had surged in the early 1800s, it was already beginning to decline in northern states, partly due to changing social norms and increasing legal enforcement. In the South, where codes of honor remained entrenched, duels were still considered a legitimate means of defending one's reputation. The Hamilton-Burr duel thus occurred at the intersection of a fading northern tradition and a persistent southern culture of honor, a collision of geography, politics, and personal pride. Massachusetts and Virginia were among the harshest states, prescribing the death penalty for the survivor of a fatal duel. Yet both ignored punishing the seconds or the surgeons who attended, despite their critical rules under the code duello. North Carolina, responding to the death of a lesser-known founding father, passed a law in 1802 punishing all participants, including seconds and surgeons, directly challenging the code's framework. 7 other states quickly followed suit. Ironically, Hamilton himself had helped push New York's anti-dueling law after his 18-year-old son Philip was killed defending his father's honor. Under that law, sending or accepting a duel challenge was illegal, punishable by disenfranchisement and a 20-year bar from political office. Burr and Hamilton had technically violated the law before even drawing their pistols. Despite the penalties, no one had ever been prosecuted, and public sentiment overwhelmingly supported those defending their honor with dueling pistols. Even when dueling was technically illegal, enforcement was inconsistent. Many states punished only the principals, while others targeted seconds or surgeons, revealing the tension between law and custom. For Burr and Hamilton, this meant that their meeting at Weehawken was not just a contest of skill and honor, but a deliberate breach of civil law, a gamble that could end in death or political ruin. Inconsistency regarding implementation of the law continues to this very day. In 2015, New York brought dueling back as an option after a trial judge found that although Parliament had outlawed the practice in 1774, the Constitution as presently constructed didn't explicitly forbid the practice. In fact, the Ninth Amendment delegates the decision to the states. Alas, the modern-day judicial system found a way to settle that particular case without trial by combat. The lack of a showdown didn't prevent the plaintiff from claiming that the court's ruling is based upon my adversary's unequivocal statement that they would not fight me. Under my reading of the law, the other side has forfeited because they have not met the call of battle. They have declared themselves as cowards. Despite the lack of any prosecutions in the Big Apple, both Burr and Hamilton felt safest crossing the river to New Jersey. 3 miles in, they reached Weehawken, familiar territory. Burr had fought there before, surviving a duel with Hamilton's brother-in-law, while John Swalworth had dueled DeWitt Clinton nearby. If you recall, 8 rounds in, Clinton hit his opponent's leg but refused to continue, making the wounded man the technical victor. Hamilton had survived 11 duels, but his 19-year-old son Philip had not been so fortunate, having been mortally wounded at this very location. Burr's confidence was high. Historian David Stewart observes, Burr's self-possession amazed his second, who forgot to bring the grease needed to load Burr's pistol. As the ball stuck part way down the barrel, Burr calmly instructed not to worry. If he missed, he would hit the next shot. The night before, he wrote his last will and a farewell letter to his daughter, instructing her to burn all correspondence tied with red string. He wore loose clothes, skipped breakfast out of a fear of developing a stomach wound, and arrived early at the dueling ground. Hamilton's preparations were no less calculated. In his final letters, he admitted his prior harshness towards Burr and revealed a plan that would fuel controversy for centuries. I have resolved to reserve and throw away my first fire, and I have thoughts even of reserving my second fire, thus giving a double opportunity to Colonel Burr to pause and reflect. In other words, he wrote that he intended to give Burr a free shot, hoping it would end the duel without bloodshed, but neither he nor his second disclosed this to their opponents. Weehawken was an ideal dueling site. The only approach was by water, allowing the doctor and a second to keep watch for wandering police officers. As long as both seconds stayed at the river's edge, both men could plausibly claim ignorance of any crimes committed a short distance away. Everything followed the 10 duel commandments, including time to get the pistols and a doctor on site. You pay him in advance and treat him with civility. You have him turn around so he can have deniability. Both men were seasoned soldiers with extensive firearms training from the American Revolution. In keeping with prior negotiations, Hamilton brought both pistols, letting Burr choose first. Stewart explains, each second began to load a pistol with powder and a 1-ounce lead ball, doing so in view of the other. These same pistols had been used in the duel between Burr and Hamilton's brother-in-law, then again in the fatal duel fought by Hamilton's eldest son, Philip. The pistols had smooth-bore barrels, reducing their accuracy. They were heavy and not easy to handle. They also had a hair trigger feature to facilitate quick firing, though there is no evidence that either duelist activated it. The 5th commandment directs, duel before the sun is in the sky. Pick a place to die where it's high and dry. Hamilton positioned himself facing the rising sun, an early signal to Burr that his opponent possessed lethal intent, the sunlight outlining his body and aiding his aim. He complained about the weight of his gun, raising and lowering the barrel repeatedly, then pulled out his glasses. Burr stayed silent, later musing in Miranda's words, "They won't teach you this in your classes, but look it up. Hamilton was wearing his glasses. Why, if not to take deadly aim? It's him or me. The world will never be the same." Fearing that Hamilton would make an orphan out of his daughter, Burr assumed the dueler's pose, sucking in his stomach to reduce his profile and using his right leg to shield the left. Finally, he raised his right shoulder in an attempt to shield his face. The seconds asked if both men were ready and then proceeded to shout, "Present." Stewart's work on this matter is authoritative, drawing from both the testimony of Burr and each of the combatants' seconds. The historian informs us that both guns fired, seconds apart. Hamilton fell, Burr swayed slightly. As the noise subsided and the gun smoke began to dissipate, Burr took a step towards his fallen adversary. Both seconds thought Burr's movement was an expressive regret, but Van Ness intercepted him. No duelist could linger. The risk of arrest was too great. Van Ness led him to the waiting boat, using an umbrella to shield his face. Burr tried to return to the dueling ground, saying, "I must go and speak with him." Van Ness insisted they depart before the doctor and Hamilton's boatman could see him. They shoved off. When the doctor arrived on the ledge, Hamilton told him the wound was mortal, then passed out. Eisenberg notes it remains unclear who fired first, though both guns discharged within seconds. The bullet struck inches above Hamilton's hip, passed through his liver, and lodged in his spine. Pendleton observed that the shock caused Hamilton's pistol to fire. He did not die immediately, spending his final hours being ferried back to Manhattan, trying in vain to secure communion from a local minister. Two priests, wary because dueling violated both civil law and church doctrine, offered consolation, but refused the sacrament. The duel had followed the 10 duel commandments to the end. The 6th instructs the duelist to pray for heaven or hell to grant entry. The 7th tells you to confess your sins, ready for the moment of adrenaline when you finally face your opponent. The 9th reminds the duelist to look him in the eye, aim no higher, summon all the courage you require, then count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, number 10 paces, fire. Despite his victory, despite dueling being widely accepted by the public, and despite the goodwill he had earned through decades of service, Aaron Burr was demonized for killing Hamilton. Hamilton's supporters launched a relentless public war of words. President Jefferson stayed silent despite his own heated rivalry with Hamilton over the years. A flurry of pamphlets further defaming Burr's name appeared in the wake of the tragedy. Ironically, the only way to defend his honor would have been to challenge the writers to duels. But the high-profile nature of the Hamilton duel had already prompted New Jersey to indict him criminally. New York, despite lacking jurisdiction, followed suit. Eisenberg notes that Burr's detractors mounted a new, even more vicious barrage of attacks. Stories circulated that he had practiced his shot to ensure deadly accuracy. He was accused of wearing silk, believed to resist pistol fire, implying cowardice. One particularly absurd charge claimed that he had never met Hamilton at the dueling site, but had hunted him down like a criminal. Even Federalists, who had once respected Burr, including Hamilton's protege at the Evening Post, now labeled him an assassin. The Burrites were no longer a faction, but a murder ring. Burr, their leader, was driven by narcissistic bloodlust. One article described him as capable of wading through the blood of his fellow citizens while laughing at the tears of widows and orphans. Hamilton, from beyond the grave, fired one last shot. In his will, he condemned dueling on moral and religious grounds, while defending his decades-long attacks on Burr's character. He insisted that his plan to throw away his first shot was honorable, with his second citing a broken branch allegedly struck by his pistol as proof, though in modern terms that could have been dismissed as incidental or caused by Burr's shot. Some speculated that Hamilton sought death, whether through depression or a subconscious death wish. A Presbyterian minister claimed that Hamilton's only crime was that he exposed his own life for Burr to take, suggesting that the most famous duel in American history was less murder than suicide. Eisenberg discounts such theories, despite the fact that at the time of his death, Hamilton was more than $600,000 in debt. She instead emphasizes Hamilton's obsession with legacy, writing that his real purpose was to envelop himself in an aura of moral authority. He believed his righteous bearing would serve to teach Burr a moral lesson. Hamilton knew, too, that he had to justify himself. Why would a man who opposed dueling consent to a challenge? He had to acquiesce, he explained, because it was the only way he could retain the ability to be, in the future, politically useful. His public reputation mattered more to him than anything else at this affecting moment. Stewart offers a more cynical reading. Hamilton's strategy was a trap. If Burr missed while Hamilton held his fire, Burr would appear both cowardly and incompetent. If Burr fired again, Hamilton had not ruled out using his second shot. And if Burr had struck, he would have killed an innocent. Every move was calculated for perception. Hamilton also had Eliza to cement his story. The American Library Association views him as the quintessential founding father: soldier, lawmaker, economist, futurist, reformer, and opponent of slavery and dueling. Burr, as the survivor, faced a far harsher fate. He went silent publicly, fled New York, and evaded murder charges in both states. He wrote to his daughter, Riley, noting that New York and New Jersey were now battling to determine which shall have the honor of hanging the vice president. The world could have been wide enough for both men, yet the twists of ambition, honor, and political rivalry had funneled them to Weehawken. Burr survived the duel, but his political career was, like Hamilton's life, effectively over. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on Bluesky beneath the handle EmpiresPod. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.